Brennan, the Vice Chairman of the L.A. County Young Republicans. Thank you both for being here today. Terence, you are a supporter of the use of certain psychedelic drugs. Let's talk about those. Which ones?
Well, Tom, I'm interested in the drugs that are technically called indole hallucinogens. These are drugs which were made illegal in the 1960s as part of the panic that was associated with large-scale distribution of LSD. Although most of these drugs, no scientific data was ever presented in any legal forum justifying the illegalization of them. It was simply that based on the LSD situation, all substances which were listed in the existing chemical manuals as causing hallucination were made illegal, in spite of tremendously promising data related to the treatment of alcoholism and psychotherapy and this sort of thing that was being accumulated at that time by the research community. So I'm very interested in having a rethinking of these drug laws which classified these research substances in the hardest drug category there is, which is Schedule 1, which is reserved otherwise for heroin, essentially. Not even cocaine is Schedule 1.
What are the common names for the drugs you're talking about?
Psilocybin, DMT, ibogaine, harmine, harmaline, and a lot of these are not so much synthetic drugs as plants that have had a history of human usage for thousands of years in remote aboriginal cultures, such as in the Amazon basin, where I've done a lot of my work.
Are there any dangers to using, for example, mushrooms?
Well, death by astonishment has been stated as a possible danger. The way you assess the danger associated with a drug is by what is called the LD50. This is how pharmacologists do it. This is a cheerful concept. It's the concept of how many rats die at what dosage level. So when you reach an LD50, half of your rats or whatever the test animal is you're using die at that level. And the effectiveness of a drug is measured by how much higher the LD50 is than the effective dose. Now in drugs like psilocybin, the LD50 is several hundred times the effective dose. In LSD, it's so high that it's never been determined. So as in terms of pharmacological activity, these things don't have the kind of profile that would alarm a pharmacologist. Where we get into controversy with them is the fact that they do create unpredictable and titanic transformations of the mental state, of the psychology of the user. And some people find this very illuminating, interesting, exhilarating. Other people do not. I certainly am not advocating the use of these things by everyone. The thrust of my advocacy is toward permitted research. You see, at the moment, there are no what are called INDs for psychedelic research. These are research permits to give these things to human beings by licensed professionals. There are no INDs operating in the United States at the moment, except for one DMT project out at the University of New Mexico. Well, considering the promise for, as I said, the treatment of alcoholism and severe depression and so forth, this research should be going forward. In no other area does science accept limitation of its expression of curiosity. Only in this area, which is an area of medical research, and it's a complicated question. It has to do with funding, the way careers fail to advance if research scientists commit to these studies. something that has been thoroughly repressed in a society which actually congratulates itself on its commitment to freedom of thought and research. But in this area, there's been a repression of a fairly Stalinist nature.
Dan Brennan, are you in favor of stalling freedom of thought?
No, of course I'm not. Freedom of thought's one of the basics of our Constitution. My position is that, 50 rats, 40 rats, even one rat, I don't know why you'd want to put a chemical in you that would kill anything. Treating alcoholics with these drugs, they have enough problems without being subject to torture of random hallucinations. My position is that why do it at all, regardless of if it's one kind of drug or the other kind of drug? Life has so much to offer, so many stimulations and ways to expand your perceptions of reality just naturally. Why would you want to put chemicals in you? Doctors more and more are using drugs less and less to treat people because of the side effects. We've seen it with birth control pills. They gave too much too large a dosage. We saw it with thalidomide in the 60s. Drugs are unpredictable, and when you don't need them, why use them? I enjoy life, and I have no reason to create these random hallucinations which may or may not be good or bad.
Well, there are a lot of assumptions in all of this. First of all, as to whether or not they're random hallucinations, pretty much the people working in the field operate on the notion that what's happening is there's some kind of boundary dissolution between the conscious and unconscious mind taking place, and that the kind of material that ordinary psychotherapy is getting at over months and years of very expensive delving rises pretty naturally to the surface. I certainly agree with you that if you don't need to take a drug, you shouldn't. That's why I stressed in my first little description that most of these things are plants with a history of thousands and thousands of years of human usage by Aboriginal peoples. So that history of human usage is where you get your human exposure sample. We know, for instance, taking the case of mushrooms, that they do not cause birth defects, tumors, blindness. We know this because we see a population in the Sierra Mazateca of central Mexico, where this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. I sort of take a longer approach to this because of my training in art history and anthropology. I would actually argue that Western civilization is fairly dysfunctional, and that a lot of people are not smelling the flowers, whether they take drugs or not, that we're at a long period of alienation from nature, the unconscious, the rhythms of the planet. This has been going on since at least the rise of monotheism, and certainly accelerated since the Industrial Revolution, that it's really a dysfunctional civilization. And this return to these archaic models, shamanism and stress on dissolving the boundaries to the unconscious, this is a major cultural trend that began in the late 19th century and has its traces in surrealism and abstract expressionism and Freudianism, and the whole character of the 20th century has been sort of the intellectual exploration of what it would mean to return to pre-print, pre-industrial models of social organization and individual psychology. And the phenomenon of drug taking is, I think, largely a kind of misrepresentation of this drive. I agree that there are many, many destructive drugs, and the solution to that is not legal repression, but education. But then there are also these substances which seem to confound our science, our medicine, our jurisprudence, and put us in a situation in relationship to them that is no more comprehending than people 15 or 25,000 years ago. It really is a mysterious part of the human organism, the relationship to psychedelic plants. And the reason I'm willing to speak for it is because in the same way that it would give me the creeps to see someone go from birth to the grave without ever having sex, it sort of gives me the creeps to think of somebody going from the birth to the grave without ever having a psychedelic experience. It's sort of like walking through life with blinders on.
We'll take a break here. We'll continue our conversation coming up. I'm Tom Likas. We are talking with Dan Brennan, the Vice Chairman of the LA County Young Republicans, and Terence McKenna, who's an author and lecturer, and we'll tell you where you can see him and about some of the things that he has been doing as the program progresses today. Dan, let's talk about that last statement that Terence made before the break. Will you feel like less than a complete person if you don't have some kind of a psychedelic experience before you die?
Oh, on the contrary, Tom, I've had plenty of experiences that make me feel very complete. I'm 30 years old. I consider that young, and I've done a lot, and that's one of the reasons I take issue with people that recreate with drugs. Terence was saying that he gets the creeps at the thought of someone not having a psychedelic experience. I would think more and more these days you must be getting the creeps as you walk around the city, as less and less people are turning to drugs for the recreation, and turning more to the wonderful rewards of Western civilization, which you seem to criticize. The exhilaration and experiences that we get, that our ancestors or these ancient Indians or whoever it is that you idolize were able to get. I saw the other day on TV these guys surfing from parachutes. This is the kind of thing I find that exhilarating, and I hope to do that sometime. Bungee jumping, all kinds of other things. Riding a roller coaster. If you haven't been on one lately, every year they get better. The kinds of things you can do and the ways to stimulate yourself far outweigh the dangers of putting a chemical poison in your body for the chance that maybe you'll get some sort of experience that you're lacking. But I believe that the best way to enjoy life, as you say, is to enjoy the fruits of 2,000 years of Western civilization and technological advancement and all the wonderful things that it's brought us. So I see no reason for drugs, and I can't see why you still do that. I thought that fad went out in the 60s and 70s. I know there's still people that do that, but I haven't seen many recently, so I'm kind of surprised at all of this. Maybe you'd like to clarify that.
Well, I think maybe passé is passé at this point, Dan, and that there's a lot more going out there than you might wish to be congealed. The notion of advocating hang glider use over psilocybin use, I'll leave between you and your insurance agent. These things are not poisonous chemicals. You must have missed what I said about thousands of years of established human usage. There are compounds which have been integrated into the human experience over millennia. It's just simply that in modern high-tech society, these hallucinogens make the establishment a little anxious, not because of their impact on health, which the experts on both sides of the question agree are pretty minimal, but because they give people funny ideas. Every time psychedelics have been poured into society in large amounts, there's then been a wave of social criticism and general restlessness that makes the establishment nervous.
I think you have a problem with the cause-effect sequence here. I think when there is problems in society and unrest, that's when people turn to the easy outs of drugs. Case in point, the 1960s, we had changes in the workplace. More women were working. We had the birth control pill, lowered sexual inhibitions. These were all stressful. The baby boom, a lot bigger, young generation coming of age. We had the Vietnam War, and we had the death of a president. People were stressed out, and rightfully so. I believe that was a turning point in the 20th century, the early 60s. I wasn't around then. That's around when I was born, but that was a turning point in the 20th century. It was very stressful, and I think the people that couldn't handle this, the people that couldn't cope with reality or were afraid to, turned to drugs. So when you talk about a history of turmoil and hallucinogens, I think it's which came first, the chicken or the egg. I'd also like to take issue with your suggestion that these are safe. They're not safe. I've seen too many people that in the 70s when I was in high school, we called them waste cases. These are guys who walked around with their lip dragging on the floor, with gazing at something beyond the horizon. I've seen what drugs do.
You have to remember, Dan, you have to make the distinction. One of the problems with discussing the drug problem in this country is that the political vocabulary has been completely impoverished. I mean, we use the word drug for everything from heroin to aspirin through alcohol and tobacco. It's certainly true that you see people wasted, and you certainly see people wandering around in the streets mumbling to themselves. But
and do we need more of that?
Well, but why? You have to go into each case and see what it is. I don't think psilocybin is having a major detrimental impact on American society. I don't think anybody else thinks that either. Heroin, crack, these things are extremely dubious. If every crackhead were a pothead, if every alcoholic were a pothead, the cost to society would be orders of magnitude lessened. The fact that we can accept legalized alcohol and tobacco proves that as a society we could sustain the legalization of any drug. Look at airplane glue. Airplane glue is a powerful drug, and it isn't a problem. And the reason it isn't a problem is because it isn't a budgeted item for control by the constabulary.
We'll take a break. Now, your telephone calls are coming up. Dan Brennan, you talked earlier about using drugs. Do you consider alcohol a drug?
Well, of course I consider it a drug, but in general, in this discussion, when I mean drugs, I mean illicit drugs. Alcohol is a problem. I don't know that I have the answers for alcohol. Certainly prohibition wasn't the answer. Alcohol, I believe, is more deeply rooted in our society and our, as we say, Western culture than other drugs. And I believe that alcohol does have cultural restrictions that these drugs don't have. In fact, I don't walk to work smelling of scotch on my breath, and those subtle cultural restrictions from thousands of years of alcohol use tend to keep it in play.
Well, some do, don't they?
Some do what?
Some do come to work with scotch on their breath.
Right, but they're definitely not looked at favorably, and they're discouraged from doing that. If you know. Somebody.
What I'm trying to find out is what has making drugs illegal accomplished?
It's well, it prevents quite a bit. The alcoholic, the bum, or I guess we call them homeless now, or homeless bums, that we see on the streets are alcoholics, and that bespeaks there is a problem with alcohol. If we were to legalize drugs freely, as some of us would suggest, we'll see more of that, and then society is left having to care for these people.
Wouldn't it be fair to say, though, that everybody who wants drugs is getting them?
Yeah, but when you legalize a drug, I believe it's an implicit consent situation where when it's illegal, people tend to not do it. If you legalize it, I believe more people will say, why not? And let's face it, not everybody has the strongest character that they can withhold addictions and temptations of drugs.
Our guest, Terence McKenna, for example, according to this story in the LA Weekly, has tried every psychedelic. Is that correct?
Well, every one I could get my hands on.
And they are certainly illegal. So here's a gentleman who wanted to experiment and who did. And I have to believe that anybody listening to our program right now who wants to get psychedelic drugs or wants to get any other kind of drug that's illegal right now can get them. So what really has making them illegal accomplished?
Well, again, as I said, making it illegal does deter a huge segment of the population, and it's not from a Big Brother standpoint, but from a parent type of standpoint.
But don't you think making it illegal simply channels the drug users then toward the drugs which are legal? And so people don't smoke pot, so they do smoke cigarettes, they do avail themselves of alcohol, and that this is at a tremendous cost to society? Everyone agrees that the medical profile on marijuana seems to make it a much more benign drug than alcohol or tobacco. How do you explain the complete acceptance of a drug considered as destructive and addicting as heroin, tobacco? How can that be a major industry and psychedelics be persecuted and hounded into non-existence? There's no consistency in the government's policy, and as long as I have you in front of me, there's no consistency in the position of American conservatives on this.
Absolutely.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you want to go back to the fundamental documents of the Republic, the pursuit of happiness is a part of that. And I think conservatives have been sucked into a very Orwellian position on drugs. Certainly William Buckley has taken a very enlightened position on drugs. And it is wrong, I think, to cast conservatives as necessarily anti-drug. Conservatives stand for the rights of the individual and the right of the individual to be secure in his home and his habits as long as he's not doing harm to anybody else. For Republicans to get into this effort where they're going to actually regulate people's states of mind is for them to line up right behind the Nazi Party and the Stalinist wing of now discredited communism. It's ridiculous.
Well, that line of arguing is the same thing that the abortion advocates, which that argument's not here today, use, that as Republicans we should be all for free everything. But you're bespeaking a situation of anarchy. Of course, the Republican Party stands for less government in our personal lives, but government exists, and that's why I'm a Republican and not a libertarian. There are limited uses for government to protect us from things that society doesn't protect us from. And among the things society doesn't protect me from is some drug-crazed addict on PCP, or some hallucinogenic guy who thinks I'm a grizzly bear and he's going to do away with me.
But you see, if you were to take the profit out of drugs, there would be no motivation for these integrated international syndicates and corrupt banking systems and all the stuff which drives the international narcotics trade, which is not really what we're talking about here. Nobody's making money on psychedelics. No nation sees its gross national product affected by its output of hallucinogens. What we're talking about here is a vanishingly small subset of the drug-using public, a subset so small that it's not appearing on the police rosters, it's not crowding the courts, it's going on among upper-class professional people, it's going on among people who have college educations, it's going on among psychologists, artists, performers, people like that. It is not a problem except that the government has this yen to actually control people's states of mind, and I think it's an extraordinarily unhealthy society. This isn't happening in Europe, and Europe is not in anarchy. Quite the contrary. Europe is a thriving civilization with a very hopeful future, while the United States is mired in endless crack wars, criminalizing of various classes. If hallucinogens were not illegal, the class of people who use them would emerge as one of the most law-abiding segments of society. It's white college kids and intellectuals who are using these things. Hardly a segment of society that I would think you would want to slam to the wall and stigmatize.
Well, I'm not slamming anybody to the wall and stigmatizing them. I'm saying that all forms of hallucinogenic or mind-altering drugs, whether they're cocaine, which is a mind-altering drug of some kind, or your mild mushrooms that don't hurt anybody. All of it is a poison in our society. Our society isn't our buildings or our streets. It's people living together. And when you institute hallucinogens, you're creating human behavior and human perceptions that are not part of our society, not traditional roles. And for that matter, I don't want to be standing in a crowded elevator next to a guy who just had some mushrooms. I don't know what he's going to do. And that's the reason government has made these drugs illegal. As far as the profit motive goes, if we if we made anything illegal, there would be a crime and profit. We saw it with prohibition and alcohol and other things. That doesn't make it right. And you're begging the question when you say legalize it so the crime stops. You're giving in to the crime. It's the same thing as handing needles to drug users and condoms to high school kids so they don't get pregnant. You're begging the question. The fact is, we've, as a society, have determined that drugs and mind-altering drugs and hallucinogens and anything else we want to stop is bad for us, and that's why they're still in decline.
Well, this is where I differ with you. When these things were made illegal, no evidence was offered that they posed any problem whatsoever, and to this day, no evidence has been offered. I mean, psilocybin, what's wrong with it? Look at the number of emergency room admissions for DMT in the last 10 years in the United States. DMT is the most powerful hallucinogen that exists. There has not been one emergency room admission for this drug in the last 10 years, yet it is illegal. It's a budgeted item for control, and people are presumably spending their time worrying about whether or not people are smoking DMT. If there's no demonstrated problem with the substance, why make a great effort to control it while you tolerate alcohol and tobacco and high lead levels in gasoline and malathion spraying over cities and all these other toxicity issues? Because you have consistently, I suppose from a personal point of view, stressed the toxicity issue, that these are poisonous drugs. If they were poisonous drugs, I'd line up right beside you. But people are, the profile on psilocybin is as benign as the profile on aspirin or acetaminophen. These are no more toxic than the drugs that people use to manage their ordinary lives.
I have an analysis here in a book by Dr. Mark S. Gold, who's a drug expert. He has a couple of books out. Mescaline and peyote. Mescaline, a psychoactive substance found in the peyote cactus, second most popular hallucinogenic. The effects are similar to LSD, but milder and often accompanied by very unpleasant side effects such as nausea and vomiting. This doesn't sound like Flintstone vitamins to me.
Well, is that because you think your drug taking should be a step into la-la land?
Well, that's what you're making it out to be.
No.
I call it a poison because it's hurting your body. When you throw up, it hurts your body. Here, I'll read you something here, a quote that I have that says that, excuse me, got my notes here.
Well, I don't agree that if you vomit, you're hurting your body. These things are purges. They're traditional shamanic tools for exploring your own personality and your place within a society. They are often not comfortable. I am not an advocate of some kind of hedonism. What we're talking about here is the right of spiritual exploration. Nobody's saying it's easy. Most of these shamanic hallucinogens, you're not going to see them become a yuppie fad. They're too intense. They're too personally transforming. These are not uppers, downers, stuff like that. These are tremendously challenging compounds that require a commitment of courage and integrity. This is why they have never broken out to become a large-scale social problem.
Let me read something here. I have a quote here. It says, "The strongest psychedelic drugs are the ones that last the shortest amount of time. That means that your brain recognizes the compound and within minutes can completely neutralize it." Do you know who said that?
I said that.
Yeah, you said that. And why would your brain recognize the compound and as quickly as possible neutralize it? It's because it's the body's defense mechanism when it discovers a poison in its body it eliminates it from your system. That's why a very strong drug is eliminated from your brain.
No. You're completely wrong. It's an issue of pharmacology. The way you judge the toxicity of a drug is by how long you feel it, how long it hangs around. If you take a drug and 48 hours later you're still having headaches and backaches, that means that your body is defenseless against metabolizing this drug into a harmless byproduct. The fact that DMT can deliver this enormous hallucinogenic rush and that 20 minutes later you can't tell you've done a drug, the reason for that is because DMT actually occurs naturally in your brain under ordinary circumstances. So when the wave of DMT comes into your brain from smoking, your brain has a billion years of evolutionary machinery in place to deanimate, dealkylate this compound into indole acetic acid, which is a harmless byproduct.
We're going to take
Drug-related crimes, if you examine the circumstances, are actually prohibition-related crimes, such as turf battles and that kind of thing. In nature, when you take a person who's intoxicated, what they tend to do is to keep to themselves. It's not a party, particularly with hallucinogens. They're not party drugs, per se. They're much more, and clinical studies will show that primates in general will keep to themselves on hallucinogens. It's, and if violence results from these things, or if crimes take place, then deal with the crime. It's against the law to assault people. It's against the law to rape and rob and do those things. Deal with that. Deal with people's bad behavior. But to blame this behavior on the drug is a cop-out. This isn't dealing with the behavior at all. This is blaming human nature on a substance. That's ridiculous. And I know I have to be brief, so I wanted to ask also Terence if he has any information, or if he knows where I could get any information on a drug called Mdma. I tried it once. It's a hallucinogen. It was absolutely fascinating. What an adventure.
Groovy.
And the only problem with it is that I had heard that it has some really severe nervous system effects, and I need to know more about it, and I haven't been able to find any information. So one comment, one question. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, well, on the MDMA question, yes, this is a compound that's been called an empathogen, not a true hallucinogen. It doesn't really cause hallucination. It's been very effective in directed psychotherapy for people working out relationship problems and that sort of thing. It seems to be a boundary-dissolving thing that allows people to articulate differences and this sort of thing. The pharmacological profile is not so good. It does do damage to what are called the dendritic spines, of which are these submicroscopic processes on the nerve. It's another case of why I prefer natural hallucinogens to synthetics, because a synthetic may have a very pleasant or useful effect and still have a pharmacological profile that makes it in some degree undesirable. The LD50 for MDMA is only about 10 times the effective dose. So to err on the side of caution, I think we should probably wait until there's more research about MDMA. But it has been promising in directed psychotherapy, and you just need to run a word search on MDMA to get the latest data, which is changing all the time.
I have a question for Tammy, if she's still...
No, she's hung up, but did you want to make a comment to her?
The thing I had in mind was, again, without having her to ask, I can tell where Tammy's coming from by the way she spit out the word Republican. And again, this is just conjecture, but I'd like to know her views on handgun control or assault rifle. And I believe her views would be the reverse, where she would say, no, the implement is what's wrong, which is what I'm saying about drug use. There's always two perceptions, but I don't...
Would it be fair to say that if guns are legal, drugs should be legal, and if drugs are illegal, guns should be illegal?
No, because I believe we can control, as individuals, I believe we can control our weapons, but I don't believe we can control the effects that drugs have.
Really? We can control our weapons?
I can control my weapon, so there's no reason to take it away from me.
What about Richard Ramirez? What about Richard Speck? What about John Wayne Gacy?
These are all convicted felons. They wouldn't have been allowed to have guns under the usual laws. I'm talking about laws that want to take guns away from me as an individual, but that's not the argument right now. My point...
Could it be argued that some people know how to use drugs properly and responsibly, and some don't?
The only way I would conjecture would be to go in a hospital room and have yourself lashed down on a bed and have 4 doctors standing by you with an EKG monitor and a heart start and stand back so you can't injure them, would be the only way I would conjecture you could responsibly use hallucinogens. And then in that case, what's the fun of that?
So you're saying our guest is irresponsible. Is that what you're saying?
I would say anyone who uses recreational drugs is irresponsible, just as he thinks I'm creepy for not using them.
Well, I would certainly, all I'm arguing for here, Dan, is that these things should be open to research, same as atomic physics, the moons of Mars. There should be no area of human knowledge that is legislated outside of the realm of professionals. Well, you remember in the Middle Ages, the church wouldn't let people dissect corpses, so medical students had to steal bodies from battlefields and gallows in order to find out how the human body was put together. And I think it's intolerable in the late 20th century that a government of know-nothing bureaucrats would dictate research goals and policy to professional scientists.
Well, I would agree, first of all, that we do have a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of know-nothings in the government, and we need less of them. As far as research on hallucinogenic drugs, absolutely. Volunteers in clinics under clinical supervision, who knows what we could
well, you're at complete odds with your own government and your own party. They're not into that. That statement that you just made...
Clinical research continues to go on.
No INDs for human administration of hallucinogens have been granted in 20 years. No LSD research is going forward, even though Humphrey Osmond was reporting 54% cure of chronic alcoholism in the late 1950s. The data is there.
Well, that aspect of it, perhaps I'm in disagreement of. What I am mainly in disagreement is the recreational aspect. You call that research and investigation. A person cannot enter into an experiment that they're researching. Scientists know that. They have to stand back and watch it. And you calling your experiences research, your perceptions are clouded by your whole experience. So you're not a valuable person to research. A doctor observing you, interviewing you afterwards, and taking physical measurements of your body functions and your responses later on in life, your psychological well-being as the weeks go by after your
well, it's a consciousness-altering drug. The only way you can study it is by examining its effects on consciousness. The normal objectivity that would be available is simply not there.
We're going to take a break. Your telephone calls are welcome here. LA and the Valleys, 5201 KFI. From the 213 or the 818 area codes, call 5201 KFI. Or call us toll-free from Orange County or the Inland Empire. The number is 1-800-767-4KFI. So if you're in the 714 area code 619 or 805, call toll-free 1-800-767-4KFI. Let's continue our conversation with Judy in Valencia on KFI. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Judy.
Mr. Brennan is not so much a young Republican as he is a young Reaganite.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a compliment.
I suppose. And he just exemplifies what has been happening with our government for the last 10 years. Mr. McKenna, you're wonderful. I've experienced natural highs, water skiing, riding roller coasters, as you said, and no high was more detailed than the highs I experienced with, quote, acid. And speaking of responsibility, he was speaking of that before, I thought nothing 10 years ago of driving a car with 8 beers in my stomach. But when we were going to be using hallucinogens, we always made sure there was one person totally clean that could guide us through the evening. And this was way before the thought of designated drivers was even dreamed of. And I don't know, Mr. Brennan, do you believe that the work of Dr. Timothy Leary should be diminished or abolished?
I don't believe any work or reading should be diminished. I think he's somewhat demented. His books are, any book of any fantasies and bizarre novels and that kind of thing are part of our society. And
also what Mr. Leary did is fiction?
I'm not saying it's fiction, but I don't know how real some of his experiences are. They were his perceptions of experiences in his brain. As I was starting to say to Terence before, it's hard for a person to evaluate something that is altering their powers of evaluation. It's a contradiction. So, who knows what Timothy Leary or anybody else in hallucinogenics is enduring. But as far as the issue of you call me Reaganite and then you say Terence is wonderful, that puts me on a great pedestal if you're going to put the Reagan years in Reaganism against the issues of drug culture and the hippie movement of the 60s and 70s. I come out way ahead. Reaganism, basically, if you watch the news recently, the breakup of communism, brought down the Berlin Wall, all this was brought about by Reagan's refusal to give in to movements that wanted to disarm the U.S., and the Russians couldn't keep up with this. Economically, the largest peacetime expansion in American history, most jobs created. I don't know about you, but I did fantastic in the 80s, and I enjoyed myself. And so Reaganism versus drug culture wins hands down, and I don't think anyone can really legally or accurately argue against that.
Let's go back to Tim Leary for a minute. He said something wonderful, which I think sheds light on the whole discussion we've had here this afternoon. He said once of LSD, he said, it's a hallucinogenic drug that occasionally causes psychotic behavior in people who have not taken it. And I've certainly observed LSD cause psychotic behavior in my father when I was 18 years old. And the American establishment, it triggered psychotic behavior and a complete disregard for human rights and ordinary legal processes during the late 1960s. So these drugs are dangerous. Apparently you don't even have to take them to be driven mad by them. This is a measure of their power.
Thank you for the call. Here's Tom in Claremont on KFI at 4:15. Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
All right, Tom.
Well, I have a question for the Republican guy. How much education do you have in drug research?
In fact, I haven't taken
No
any.
kidding.
Well,
No kidding.
You know what? This is a social discussion.
Oh, well,
whether drugs should be legal.
No, it's not. It's not a social discussion. It's a discussion. You see, you make it a social discussion when it fits your purposes to make it a social discussion, and then you throw in some erroneous so-called biological.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead, ask me.
How do you feel about nuclear power or nuclear bombs? Should we all have those? No, that just.
What does that have to do with this particular discussion?
Do you have an opinion on it? You don't even have to answer it.
I do have an opinion on it.
Okay, have you taken nuclear physics?
Discussion. Why don't you just stick to the issue?
No, I'm making a valid analogy here. Yeah, we're talking about an effect on society, whether it's drugs or nuclear power. I don't know about drugs. You don't know about nuclear physics, but we both have.
Actually, you don't know that, bud. You don't know what I do for a living.
Well, whatever you do, but okay, it's any subject is relevant. You can have an opinion in our society on aspects of society without having to have a PhD in that.
Yeah,
God knows enough people are
you want to enforce your uneducated opinion upon everybody.
I'm a very educated person.
Based on your fears. You said it yourself. You're afraid of people. Well, that's your problem.
I never said I was afraid of people.
Yes, you said you're afraid to be in an elevator with somebody who might be on.
I'm afraid of the effects of the hallucinogenic. I'm not afraid of the person.
Well, you don't know what the hallucinogen's going to do. So how can you be afraid of it?
That's what I'm afraid of, is that I don't know what it's going to do.
It's because you don't bother to look it up. Let me ask you something. How many people have died from marijuana use?
I don't have a figure on that.
There is a figure. It's called 0. Okay, how many people die from alcohol and tobacco use?
I would dispute that 0. You're just pulling that out. You don't say there's never been an auto accident by someone who was high on marijuana? I find that hard to believe. I really do.
Guess what? Guess who keeps those records? It's the Department of, it used to be called Health, Education, and Welfare, and they've been doing studies on marijuana up until like 1978, and since then they have been keeping records on auto accidents and things like that to see who's driving high. And guess what? Marijuana doesn't figure in it, but alcohol does. In fact, alcohol and tobacco, which are both touted by one of your strongest Republican fellows up there in Congress, is killing 500,000 people a year.
Hey, you know what? I think they're bad too.
About the good aspects of something that marijuana could do. How many pharmacological uses does marijuana have?
It has several, and it should be used as a prescription.
It's a Class 1 drug.
I didn't classify it.
Well, gee, who did? Do you know what a Class 1 drug is?
Yeah, he would. I don't know the specifics.
Well, Class 1 drug means it has no good use whatsoever. Alcohol, which has very little good use whatsoever, is not a class 1 drug. It's legal. Heroin, which does have some use.
Hey, alcohol has some good uses, boy. After a stressful day, a good shot calms me down. So I don't say alcohol has no good use.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you can do your drug legally and everybody else has to hide in the closet afraid some...
I'm not telling everybody else.
He's going to call in and...
I'm saying we have to have guidelines as to... I'm saying we have to have guidelines as to the kinds of chemicals that are flowing through our society. Alcohol happens to have been here for thousands of years.
So is marijuana. Marijuana grew here naturally before we cut it all down to plant...
It's not been part of Western culture, and as like it or not, that's where...
Who's Western culture? Your white Western culture?
The United States, yeah, I happen to be white.
European Western culture?
Sure, that's where we're living. We're living in white Western European culture. Sorry about it. But marijuana is illegal because it traditionally hasn't been used in our society.
No.
Alcohol's gone back thousands and thousands of years. I'm not defending it. Alcohol is bad. I hardly drink as much as I used to. I think it's bad for me. And I'm not advocating alcohol use or tobacco use.
Why was marijuana made illegal?
Why?
Why?
There's enough, the same reasons alcohol was illegal at one time.
No, Bo. No. The reason marijuana was made illegal was because DuPont...
Slow down.
DuPont got a...
Calm down.
No, I'm plenty calm. DuPont got a patent for plastics and oils, and guess what? They wanted to replace all the things that marijuana is made out of, like clothing and paper and canvas.
And what, did you poll every congressman who voted on making marijuana illegal? And they told you that it was because of DuPont? This is conjecture on your point.
Read your history. Pull your head out of your little Republican handbook and read real history. Check things out. It's in the library. Education.
Tom, I got to move on here. I thank you for the call. We'll continue. I'm
drug user. I haven't used drugs in about 4 years. I've used damn near everything in the book and never shot anything up. But I've had acid. I've had everything, and it set my life back 5 to 6 years. I don't know where you get off advocating drug use when I know many people whose lives it's ruined. I was able to pull myself out and put myself back on track. I'm now a professional. I finally completed college, but it took me a long time. And it's basically because of drug use. And I don't know where you get off advocating drug use. And I've used hallucinogenics, and I tell you, I don't want to be on the road with drunk drivers, let alone somebody on acid. I've driven on acid, and it's not a fun trip.
Well, life is full of pitfalls, and you don't organize a society around the weaknesses of the few. You try to organize a society so that freedoms and risk and responsibility are balanced out for the largest number of people. This is why we have differences of opinion on stuff like pornography, access to birth control, drugs, all of these issues that have to do with how people use their own existential freedom are bound to raise controversy. A lot of people have ruined themselves on drugs. I don't advocate unrestricted use of drugs or profligate use of drugs. I advocate that they be available for responsible use in a program of profound education for the public so that choices can be made. I don't think it's drugs that are the problem. It's ignorance about the effects of drugs that lead most people down the primrose path. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I wouldn't. For one thing, personal responsibility is an endangered species in the United States, okay?
Well, but if this is a democracy, then we've got a real problem on our hands. I mean, of course, we can put some kind of totalitarian regime in and stomp out drugs and stomp out prostitution and stomp out pornography. But the idea is that you don't want a society like that. Great civilizations are extraordinarily complicated matters. And if you don't like something, I would recommend you don't do it. But as far as going on a crusade then to restrict the rights and availability of these things to other people, I just can't understand that. I think society should be as free as society can be without flying to pieces. And this society isn't flying to pieces. This is the richest, most creative, most interesting society on earth. I treasure the anarchy and pluralism of American society.
The American mainstream youth cannot handle drugs. I couldn't handle drugs. I don't know anybody that couldn't handle drugs.
Well, they can't handle
the
sex either. I think we can't stamp that out, so you just have to grow up, and you have to grow up with relationship to drugs, and you have to grow up in relationship to credit. There are a number of things in life that are going to make demands on you to get your act together.
That's not real world. That's nice in a philosophic, whatever.
Bill, I think what this is Dan, Bill. What you're trying to say, and the point I'm trying to make, is that when we get together as a society, which Terence is advocating society, it's because we get together for common goods, common interests, and the original societies got together so human beings could pursue a better livelihood with the help of each other. But you have to stick to common norms of society, and you, more than anyone, Bill, would probably be able to corroborate this for me, that the drug use of any kind is a pollution in this norms. It causes behavior that is not part of the behavior patterns that we founded society on, and that our Western civilization, that the white Western, as they call it, civilization everyone keeps trashing, became so great with. It was because of this common civilization that we went to the moon, and we have artificial hearts and all that.
Dan, you were just saying you like to come home from work and pour yourself a shot, and I think that's fine. But hey, it's drug use, hard drug use, a drug which has shattered the lives of millions of people. So do you think then the government, out of concern for those millions of people, should come into your house and lock up your drug cabinet and take you away?
Well, absolutely
it's absurd.
not.
Of course not. But this argument from tradition is no argument whatsoever. I mean, if we stuck to tradition, we'd still be sticking with slavery. Part of what the evolution of Western rights and this Western civilization has been about is a constant redefining and broadening of what human freedom means. This is why you give the right to vote to women. This is why you free slaves. This is why you lower drinking ages. American society, Western democratic thinking, is an experiment with expanding the rights of the individual. This is the classic Republican position.
And it's a great civics lesson, but also in that view, Western society in general has been moving more and more away from drugs and rejecting what was an experiment in the 60s and 70s.
Well, that's
so
fine,
the vast
then
majority
let
of
it do
society,
that, but we don't need to have it legislated. We don't need drug czars shoving it down our throats.
Absolutely, because the effect of the drugs is something that we can't control. If I choose not to use drugs, that doesn't make me immune from other people that are using drugs, and that's where the real danger is. And our society continues to reject drugs. The number of current drug users fell from 23 million to 12.9 million, a drop of 44% between 85 and 90. That shows me that people are rejecting drugs. People like Bill that had the experience, their lives were worse for it, and we need to get that out of our society.
Well, you do it by education, not by legislation. Otherwise, you infantilize your entire population, and the whole notion of democracy is based on an educated citizenry.
We're going to take a break on KFI. Hello.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
Okay.
Good. Two things. I'll just make this real quick because it looks like I'm headed towards the mountains. First off, Dan, you need a little bit more life experience, I think, before you start putting your foot on other people's throats. That's item one. Item two is, Terence, I'm really glad that the drugs are illegal at this particular point. I believe in them being illegal. I've done most all psychedelics. I'm 38 years old, grew up in the 60s. And I would rather, if you're on drugs, I'd rather have your pus-filled cranium at that particular point locked behind closed doors so that the police don't arrest you. If you're out and about in public, I'd want you arrested. It's dangerous. They're bad for you. That's it. Last. Bye.
Thank you. Any response to that?
Well, my answer would be, again, I guess apparently he's making allusions to the other guy who asked me if I had taken any drug studies or whatever, and my defense to that would be, again, this is a social issue, and I'm a political volunteer, and I'm here expressing opinions from the standpoint of someone who is a voter and works with blocks of voters, and I'm expressing a social opinion here. And I'm not putting my foot on anybody's throat. I don't have anything against anyone. I'm just against the drug drugs and the things that they do. And I don't think I need a huge education in psychedelic drugs or whatever to know the effects on our society that they're causing. So my point would be that I think anyone's entitled to an opinion, and as are those callers.
And I certainly don't think anybody should drive on any drug, legal or illegal. The use of hallucinogens usually goes on in the home or in wilderness. It's a very circumscribed activity. I don't think anybody should be out moving around on the freeways on any drug. That's obvious.
Thank you, and we continue with Beverly, a first-time caller from Studio City on KFI. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I think the real question here is integrity. I think doing alcohol in your own home, keeping it within your own integrity is safe and okay. But when you get to, doing drugs in public is not cool. I myself have done conscious-raising drugs in the privacy of my own home, and it was the most valuable experience. I can't say enough good things about it.
May I ask what it did to your consciousness? That's actually one of the points I made at the beginning is, why would you put these chemicals in?
I think, in all due respect for everybody who has not done them, it's so different to speak from experience. It's so different.
And how has it changed your life? Did it give you anything physical, or
no.
Have you gotten better jobs? Do you have a better memory? What tangible has it done for you?
It's not that kind. It's a spiritual kind of consciousness. What it's done is it's helped me have more respect for the planet, for my fellow man. I own my own business, so I don't have a better job because of it, but I can say I have a better relationship with my customers. It's opened up my heart and my soul for humanity.
Which planet do you have respect for now? There are quite a few.
Well, I think you're getting kind of cute with me.
Well, my point is, you still haven't told me what you've tangibly gained. You say you
It's not a tangible thing to gain.
So how can you advocate it? What are you advocating then?
What I hear the caller saying is that it changed her attitude toward reality, that it actually changes your point of view, that it's possible to move outside the white bread point of view.
How can a step away from reality to an altered reality that is not any kind of structure?
Altered reality.
It is an altered reality.
Hold on a moment here. I can say that I have tried cocaine. I'm against it. I think cocaine is very much the downfall of the nation. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't drink alcohol. And I don't do consciousness-raising drugs, but maybe once a year, if that.
And you recycle?
It's not. Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
If you want to get funny or cute about this, it's fine with me.
Okay.
But I think everybody pulling together as a family, as a nation, as a planet is something that we can all hopefully strive for.
And the drug has caused this?
Pardon?
The drug has allowed us to get together? Because I know a lot of people that have found ways to improve their life with interactions with other people and looking at their own lives without the drug. How is this different? How is this going to affect me?
I've done a lot of counseling. My friends who have done conscious raising substances have also done a lot of counseling, a lot of inward work. I think the real issue here is integrity. And can you do it with integrity and honor the substance, or do you have to go out and party and just take it and run amok and drive on it? That isn't it. That just isn't it.
Either way, I say, why need the drug? I know...
You don't need the drug.
Well, then why did you take it? You said it affects...
It helps. It accentuates...
So you need it to help?
I don't need it to help. It helps. And I can say for the people who smoke cigarettes are real irresponsible people. They throw their cigarette butts all over the damn nation. I think it's horrible what they do. I think it's horrible. And I think the tobacco companies ought to print on the packages that these people, the cigarette smokers, should be responsible for their butts. In fact, I've taken it to the extent of when people flick it out their car window, if I'm at a red light, I'll pick up the butt and throw it back in their car.
Beverly, thank you very much for the call. Eddie, first-time caller from Long Beach. You're on KFI. Hello.
Oh, hello. I'd like to say that I don't believe that any good to society
is brought about by people doing these drugs, and most people will eventually leave their homes when they do those drugs, and then they will become the danger to a normal person.
Absolutely, that's a point I've been making, is that, people say, oh, I'm not hurting anyone, but these hallucinations are not controlled, and all the literature says that a drug experience is described in terms of probability, and there's always a probability that you'll think someone's chasing you with a knife, and you'll go running out the door if you have such a hallucination, and, then you become a danger to society. And that's why I said the only responsible situation would be if you were strapped to a hospital gurney with a couple of doctors watching you, and I can't imagine anyone advocating that.
Well, there's just an assumption here that you're crazy. I mean, you assume you're crazy.
There's that possibility always occurs.
I think there are a number of people out there who don't assume they're crazy and who are not afraid of their own mind. It's a really paradoxical position to be so self-doubting that you define yourself as psychotic before you ever start. It means that your mind has been messed with by the terminal crisis of Western civilization. If we could save ourselves by preaching it, we would have saved ourselves thousands of years ago. The fact of the matter is, there has to be a kind of pharmacological intervention to halt the spread of political points of view and value systems which are murdering the planet. I mean, it's literally happening. And the ordinary institutions of Western civilization are bankrupt.
Let's back up. That was a strong statement. How does one murder a planet?
You murder a planet by fighting wars that set fire to enormous oil fields. You murder a planet by depleting the ozone hole, by allowing CFC production to soar. All the things that untrammeled, unconscious use of resources creates ends up being a deficit for the whole planet. And you seem to believe that business as usual, which seems to be the repressing of non-traditional habits as far as this discussion is concerned, that business as usual can go on into the indefinite future.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, this civilization is in a terminal crisis because of bad habits. And they aren't drug habits. They're habits like exploitative capitalism, exploitative use of resources, pollution of rivers and air.
But such exploitation is the reason you're sitting in a comfortable padded chair right now. This is the reason you don't have to worry about pneumonia or polio. This is why you can go back to San Francisco tonight in 20 minutes. So don't cut down civilization.
No, but millions of people are paying with lives of misery and degradation so that a few people in these high-tech civilizations can live inside a cultural fantasy of unlimited wealth and resources, but it's based on the broken bodies of millions of people in the third world.
We're going to take a break.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
And a pleasure to speak to you again, Tom.
Thank you.
Yes, gentlemen, we've got a more fundamental problem. Let me explain my position where I stand. I do not use drugs. I do not advocate the use of drugs. I don't drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, or anything else. However, I did grow up through the 60s, and I did experiment years ago like many of the youth of that time era did. Dan, I find that you're a very honest soul and that you mean well. However, let me ask you a question. And this may seem a little bit off the beaten path, but it really isn't. Have you ever filed a Freedom of Information Act request?
No, I haven't had any reason to.
Why is that?
Why is it? Because the information that I would like, that would fall under that category isn't anything that I've had any personal need for at this point, anyway, in my political career.
Well, in your political career, sir, it would behoove you to get smart about the issues. This whole drug war is not about cleaning up America and making it a wonderful place to live.
It already is a wonderful place to live.
I believe that. I make 6 figures a year, pal. I love this country.
Great.
And I'm very, very concerned.
So what's your point?
Very, very concerned about the Bill of Rights situation in this country today. And so should you be.
I am concerned.
Okay.
I'm very concerned about the Second Amendment.
Well, I'm concerned about the Second Amendment as well.
But
okay,
what's your point?
The Amendment, the entire context, the entire body. Now, I don't fall down on the side of any liberal issues or conservative issues. I'm not even sure I walk the middle because I make sure that I study the issues. But the drug issue today, in my opinion, drugs should not be legalized. They should be decriminalized. Government should not be in the business of subsidizing drug use as it is with alcohol and tobacco, for example, because they have a much greater abuse problem. Government has a money abuse problem.
Absolutely.
And anything that will fill the coffers of government, I'm against.
Unfortunately, Ken, it sounds nice to say decriminalize it and everybody will be responsible and do their own, but when you decriminalize something, just the action of decriminalizing it is saying we think it's okay. And in fact, I think it is criminal for a person to ingest PCP because they will become, in a state that harms other people in society or has the potential to harm them. And that's why it's criminal, because those are criminal actions.
When was the last time you picked up a newspaper, sir? That is happening anyway. That happens daily.
Does it make it right? Does it make it right?
In Los Angeles alone, due to drug turf wars and, like you say, the use of PCP and so on and so forth.
How much more right would it be if it was sold, across the counter at the movie theater to help you enjoy your movie?
I am not saying that it should be sold. I said decriminalized, not legalized.
If you take the profit out of it, you're going to take the criminal syndicates out of it, and that's where the problem lies, Dan.
It doesn't lie with the criminal syndicates. That's just one aspect of the drug problem. Without the criminal syndicates, with it legal, there are problems in our society with tranquilizers that the criminal syndicates aren't in because people have access to those.
Well, but we don't suggest that we make the tranquilizers illegal and restrict scientific research and shut down pharmaceutical companies.
Well,
there's an acceptable risk in having tranquilizers in society. You have to look at the risk-benefit equation on each substance individually. You can't have a blanket, broad sweep, know-nothing attitude toward these drugs. You have to gather data on each one individually and then make a decision. Pot no one argues that it is much more benign than tobacco or alcohol. The only argument you've been able to offer for why alcohol and tobacco are legal and pot isn't is something about tradition. An argument which would leave you defending slavery if carried to its logical conclusion.
I said about alcohol and tobacco is that they are indeed bad. They are one of the evils of our society, but you come up with a good method to get them out. I don't think there is one. I don't have the answer, and I don't think that I'm not advocating that we encourage them.
Dan, marijuana was decriminalized in California a long time ago, and I don't recall, at least as of late, seeing any public abuse or anything like public drunkenness as a result of that action had been taken.
No, but it's one more aspect of what you've just said was bad. Alcohol and tobacco are bad for our society. Marijuana is now a third rung in that ladder. And as I said before, when I was in high school, of course I tried marijuana, but I saw too many kids that I knew literally walking around with their tongue hanging past their waist in a trance.
I absolutely agree.
And that is an evil of marijuana.
Dan, I'm really not fighting you on this. What you have to understand, I'll go back up just a couple of inches. No, I do not feel that drug use is a productive use of a human being's time.
Trying to make all evening is that basically drug use, I think the majority of the population does agree that drug use is bad. There's too much in life to stimulate yourself to have to go to these chemicals to put them in your body. There's no need for them. There's just too much experiences. That's why I'm involved in the Young Republicans, is the stimulating debate that we have. And by the way, most Young Republicans don't agree on most issues, and a lot of them don't agree with me here today, but I'm here to say my point. The Young Republicans is a group that is people who are interested in politics, interested in changing government and reducing the size of government and its role in our life. If you want to get involved in Los Angeles County Young Republicans, you can call us on our hotline, area code 213-543-3805 for LA County. In Ventura County, you can call Greg Ma at area code 805-493-0791. And in Orange County, you can call Clive Friedenrich, 714-646-5499. We're a real fun bunch. Join us.
All right. Author and lecturer Terence McKenna, 30 seconds to wrap up here.
Well, I just like to say that I think what life is something which should be lived in its fullness, and that if you block yourself off from experience, you define yourself as infantile. Every society has thought it had all the answers. The real truth is the world is not only stranger than we suppose, it's stranger than we can suppose. And there's an obligation to look into the edges of being and to empower our own personal experience. Sunday night I'll be over in Van Nuys at the Masonic Temple from 8 to 10 p.m. giving a benefit for the LA Mycological Society. If people are interested in talking about the impact of psychedelic plants, specifically mushrooms, on human evolution, why I'd invite them to come out Sunday evening. It's $15, tickets at the door. That's 14750 Sherman Way in Van Nuys, Sunday evening at 8.
Thank you both for being here today. We appreciate it. Up next.